My sister married this man, and they had 7 girls together. It was her revenge because she had 5 brothers and no sisters, so she had 7 girls, all girls. And at one point, I was asked to go out. My brother-in-law's name is Bob. He asked me to go out to his grandparents who lived out in San Fernando. And when I went out there, I think his grandfather was 96 and his grandmother was 93, and they were pretty good shape. They died the next year. But when I went out there, I was talking to them, and she asked me to go up to, over the fireplace, there was some kind of a little art thing, and I went over, and she showed it to me, and then she said, turn it around, and I did, and there was a little number on it, a 3. And I said, well, what's the 3 for? And she said this. She said, everything that my husband and I own in this house, we're giving it to all of our family. So when grandchildren or great-great-grandchildren would come in and say, Grandma, I like that. That's pretty. She would keep that in her mind, and when they lived, she went and wrote a note. That one goes to her. This one goes to him. So everything, all of their possessions were going to be given to the family. Now tell me what you think would happen if you receive something from Grandma, you receive something from Grandpa, and you put it in your bedroom, and what do you think would happen every time that you walked in and saw that thing? You would think about them. You would think about them. It would connect you. You would remember. And that was the way they wanted to be remembered. They couldn't give a piece of them, so they gave something that they owned, something that their grandchildren or great-grandchildren had admired. And that way it would always be with them, and they could remember them that way. Well, Jesus was smart. Jesus was smart. He didn't just say, remember my words. We often forget words. He didn't just say, remember what I taught you, because sometimes people didn't even learn the lesson very well. But he said this, at this Last Supper that they were celebrating the Passover, at the very end of the meal, he said those words we heard in the first reading. He took bread, he blessed it, he broke it, he said, this is my body, eat it. Then he took a cup of wine, he said, this is my blood, the blood of the new covenant. It will remove sin. When you drink this, remember me until I come again. And so you know what happened? After he died and rose, ascended to the Father, and the little community of followers began to gather in homes to pray and remember him, they would take bread and bless it and break it and say those words, this is my body, then they would eat it. And this was their way, not just for a person, but for all of them to connect with Jesus and to say, he's here. He's really here with us in spirit. That doesn't mean inside the bread he's walking around, but the bread and the wine are his food, and he says, I'm this food. And when you share this food, when you eat this food, and when you drink this food, and when you give this food to each other, I will be there with you. Now, you know, it's interesting. I have often used this example, but I'm going to imagine me going to my grandmother's bedside in the hospital. She's dying, and I know she's dying. She knows she's dying, and she says, Perry, you're my favorite grandson. Of course, she said that to all the grandsons and granddaughters. Says, you're my favorite. I said, I know, Grandma, thank you. And then she says, here, I want you to have my watch. And she gives me her watch. I say, Grandma, it's a woman's watch. She says, don't worry about it. I said, but Grandma, it doesn't even work. And she says, I know. But you see, my mother gave that to me, and I've never taken it off. I take a shower with it. I've never removed it ever. It's been with me ever since my mother died. So I want you to wear it so you can remember me. So I walk around and wearing it. This didn't happen, but I'm just using an example. And somebody says, why are you wearing a woman's watch? I said, well, it's my grandma's. Yeah, so what? And look, it doesn't even work. It's not 2 o'clock. Well, you see, and I tell them this story. And I say, and you know what? Every time I look at the watch or feel it or someone comments it like you did, it makes me aware. It opens me up. I pause and I listen and I think of my grandma, and she's here in my heart with me. I feel her presence. I know her love. That's what Jesus wanted to do for us. He wanted a way so that we could open our lives to His love again and again and again. That's the good story, the happy story. But I want to tell you a sad story, okay? It only happened twice, but it happened like 10 days apart. I'll never forget it. I was in my first parish as a pastor. I was about 12 years ordained. And I did it to one man, and then 10 days later, another man. And I think maybe they were from the same town. I don't know, the same church. But they were from Mexico. And they're preparing to get married. And there's a little questionnaire you ask of them before. And I said, when was the last time you went to confession? And they go, oops. So they're about 26 years old. And I said, well, a year ago? No, Father. 2 years? No. 3 years? No. So I thought, maybe I better start skipping more years. So I said, 5 years? No, Father. Heads down. I said, 10 years? No, Father. 15 years? Yeah, about 15, Father. I said, okay, well, you're here. Blah, blah, blah. So I get to the next question. When was the last time you went to communion? Oops. And I said, well, was it 1 year? No, 2. I went through the same thing. About 15 years? Yeah, about 15 years, Father. I said, oh, okay, all right. So they could go to communion the next day. When it happened, I didn't think a whole bunch about it till 10 days later, another man came in and said the same thing. And then it hit me. Their first communion was their last communion. They went one time. They worked for a year to prepare to receive their first communion, and then they never had a second one. That's not the idea. The idea is that the first communion is so special because the rest of the hundreds of thousands of times that we're going to receive come out of this day, spring forth from this day. Remember my first communion? And 10,000 times later I say, I can still remember my first communion there at St. Bernard's. Because this day is special. But it's only the beginning. It's only the beginning. And the reason we receive is so that Jesus can come into us. He said, I want to be in you and I want you to be in me. I want you to live in my love. So today, boys and girls, young men and women, that's why we have you here and that's why we prepared you. So this day will be unforgettable, and that you will know that Jesus, whom we know so much because of the Scriptures, wants to live inside you and be a part of you always, never to be forgotten. And if you can look at a picture or an art piece that came from your grandma before she died or after she died and never forget her, how much more when we eat and drink the presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. No voy a repetir todo porque es principalmente por los niños, pero estoy diciendo que este día es un día que nunca puedo olvidar, pero es el primero de muchas comuniones que van a recibir al resto de su vida, y este día es muy, muy, muy especial. Please stand.